I think we are already live. So good morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. Today we continue our sessions from the 6th journey on Eastern philosophy from the University of São Paulo. Today, right now, we have our session on Japanese philosophy and Izutsu's consciousness and essence. And first of all, I would like to thank everyone here who is present, who is watching right now, and our session, our table here. Diogo, Rosa, June, Hans-Peter, thank you very much for being here. Rodrigo, of course, who was actually the person who invited me to this project. First of all, before we begin, we thought it would be interesting to have a very few words explaining who Izutsu is, what this work we are talking about is, this consciousness and essence. And so Hans-Peter, the translator of the book into German, is going to begin explaining us a little bit about the author. So Hans, it's an honor to have you with us here. First of all, thank you very much. And
thank you,
feel free to say just
Lucas,
a very brief.
And
yeah.
I wish to thank the organizers of this conference for having us. And I'm glad to be with you, if not in Brazil, but in this virtual space of Zoom. And I was asked to give a very short, a very brief introduction into who Izutsu Toshihiko, the hero of our project, is or was. First, this project we have launched maybe a year ago or so was initiated by Ralf Müller from the University of Hildesheim. Ralf cannot join us right now because he's stuck in a train or some kind of accident or so. So he was originally meant to give this introduction. So it was switched over to me 5 minutes ago or so. And I tried to make up something and talk very briefly about Izutsu Toshihiko. Izutsu Toshihiko belongs not to the so-called Kyoto school of Japanese philosophy. If you hear usually about Japanese philosophy, you almost associate Kyoto school with Japanese philosophy. Izutsu is a very good example for Japanese philosophy being much more broader and much more diverse than Kyoto school philosophy. Izutsu was born in 1914 and he died in 1993. And he taught at the famous Keio University in Tokyo. It's a private university. And he also had professorships at the University of Montreal and Tehran. And this is interesting because Izutsu is one of the very few Japanese philosophers who is very versed in Islamic philosophy, and he could read that stuff, and that is quite unusual for Japanese philosophers to be such qualified to read and interpret Islamic philosophy. And Izutsu taught on Islamic philosophy in Tehran. That's a very unusual thing. This was, of course, before the Islamic Revolution in 1978, was that, or 79? Before that, Izutsu taught in Tehran. His books are not very known outside Japan. There are some translations into German. The one I translated in English, it's called Consciousness essence. I think it is the most profound book of Izutsu, and it's a kind of tour de horizon about, he calls, Eastern philosophy, which stretches from the Middle East to Japan. So it's a very broad range. He calls Eastern philosophy, and he approaches this philosophy under the header of consciousness and essence. And this book is also at the center of our project. Diogo, who is with us here, has been so kind and join us to translate it actually into Brazilian Portuguese. Is that the right expression? And yeah, and that's a book which really presents the whole scope of Izutsu's scholarship, which is really unique. And in our panel today, we will try to give you some glimpses into that very rich book. Of course, we cannot cover the whole thing because it is much too big for one conference here. And without further ado, I think we should go into medias res. And who is our first presenter?
That would be me.
That's Lucas. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Does anybody of our group has to say something more about Izutsu? Some comments or so? No?
I would actually just like to point out that
go ahead.
Our group is also connected to this other partner of the organizers of this event, which is NOGP, right? The European Network of Japanese Philosophy. That's actually where I met some of the members of the group, like Diogo, Ralph, Hans. So it's great that we have this opportunity to have one of the partners of Alafi, of this already traditional event here in Brazil on Eastern philosophy with us in this session. So that would be it. Okay, so thank you so much, Hans. That was perfect. It was a great introductory remark. So I'm going to talk today about the theme of my talk is historically systematic on Izutsu's intercultural method for systematic philosophy. Ironically enough, given that I have been quite busy with this organization, with the event, my presentation is going to be anything but systematic. So I ask you to be patient with me. But already since my first contact with Izutsu and the first presentations we gave on him in the NOGP Congress, actually, I was very impressed with the way he approached those different Eastern philosophical traditions. And I thought there was something there interesting that we could explore to think about how we can do intercultural philosophy in an intercultural way, which is something that I approached in the first talk. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about this today. But also in another aspect, how the way in which he uses the history of philosophy to think systematically about philosophical issues. So I would like to talk a little bit about the way I see this approach of Izutsu to doing philosophy systematically through the history of philosophy. I really won't take long. I also don't want to take long because we already have many people here to give their own presentations within a relative short amount of time. But what seems interesting to me here in the way that I consider Izutsu to approach doing philosophy systematically is that a lot of times when you think about that, and you think, for instance, about analytical approaches, you tend to think, for instance, of someone who is going to approach directly an issue and maybe use one philosopher or other in the history of philosophy, but already according to one interpretation one already has, and the concepts one already uses within or one's own framework, and try to give a direct solution to those problems. What I think that is interesting here in Izutsu is that, well, his systematic approach apparently is to try to provide what he calls a synchronic Eastern philosophy, in a way of a synthesis of what he considers to be somehow the fundamental philosophical perspective from the East, so to speak, and that he believes that can bring a unique contribution to the discussion of contemporary issues in philosophy. So one can already see why he has also to work from an historical perspective, because he's not only trying to provide a fresh philosophical framework, he claims that this framework he's providing is fundamentally connected to Eastern culture, one could say. But in order to do this, what I think is interesting in his approach is, and that I see myself considering and sometimes even doing in a similar way, is to try to go deep into different philosophical traditions in order to find different possible ways of combining fundamental concepts. And by doing this, getting a better understanding of what those concepts entail. So this is what I see happening here when we are talking about, for instance, about those two main concepts, of course, of consciousness and essence, right? On a broader level, one could say, it seems to me, and again, this is still a very preliminary reading. We are still beginning our group, our research group, and we still have to go deeper on some of the issues. But on a very preliminary reading, it seems to me that the main way through which Izutsu thinks of consciousness is dividing it into those two levels. One level that he calls of the superficial, although that might not be the most accurate term to describe it, but the superficial consciousness and the deep consciousness. And the superficial consciousness is where we tend to perceive things as separated from each other, as determined, and so as individuals, so to speak. And the deeper level is this level of consciousness where you perceive things as in us this inarticulated indifference to one another, one could say, in which they are all within the same background of being, which allows for no separation, which has to be grasped as a whole, in which no separation, no differentiation is made. So, but what is interesting here is he's thinking, well, one of the first moments where we see these combinations of concepts is to say, okay, so we have those two levels of consciousness. And we have this concept of essence, of that which makes a being what it is, has determined, has individual, or rather, let's say has determined, because being determined is not necessarily individual here, as we are going to see. So where would you think at first that this concept of essence has this way in which beings are determined? I'm always, my accent on this word, ironically, is always confused. I'm not sure if it's determined or determined, but you guys get what I mean, yeah. So where would you expect this concept to be operating? At first, of course, you would think that it would be operating only on the level of the superficial consciousness, right? Because it's there that we perceive things has determined and has separated from each other by their determinations precisely, by being something different of one another. However, and this seems to be somehow what Izutsu presents when he begins talking about Indian Buddhism, right? And he's saying, look, there you have this idea where we tend to perceive in the everyday world, things as having an essence which distinguish themselves from one another, but that's only how it works on this superficial level, the level of conventional truth. When we put this aside and we go to the ultimate level, which would be the deeper level of consciousness, we see everything through this notion of shunyata, of emptiness, of this impossibility of distinguishing and separating beings as having individual, isolated existence, right? So this would be one possible way to understand the connection between those concepts of consciousness and essence. Essence is connected only to the superficial level. But then Izutsu moves on to another tradition and says, but hold on, this concept of essence, one can actually connect it also to the deeper level of consciousness, such as it happens in Advaita Vedanta, right? Because in Advaita Vedanta, in this deeper level, you only have one essence, sure, but it is one essence in which all beings are connected, but through this conception of something that is essential and lies at the ground level of consciousness, of experience as such. So there is something that is essential and that is singular, the one without a second, right, in the terms of Advaita Vedanta. And so you have this concept of essence actually operating on both levels of consciousness. The difference is on the superficial level, we perceive wrongly things as having different essences, if things existed separated into different essences, when in truth there's actually one essence. Okay, and then things get a lot more complicated and a lot more interesting, I would say, when we come to Islamic philosophy, because then we have another connection between concepts that is explored in its different combinations, which is, I would say, about the connection between essence and individuality, right? Because so far we have been talking about essence as that which individuates, so to speak. Even on the deeper level in the Advaita Vedanta, this essential level of Atma, of Brahman, of the Absolute, is thought has a singular, has a one. So one essence, one individual in that sense. But then Izutsu comes to Islamic philosophy and says, look, here things are thought of a little bit differently, because while it's true that essence here also operates on both levels, you also have an idea of essence that is not connected with individuality directly, but rather with universality. You have this idea of an universal essence that somehow determinate, but at the same time universal, right? One could, for whoever this helps, of course, it's always not very helpful to clarify one obscure philosopher by means of another, but this kind of reminds us of the universal, of the concrete universal in Hegel, in a sense. So this idea which brings us a fresh perspective in the sense, well, maybe it's not because something is determinate and essence determines things, that this has to imply that this that is determinate has to be individual. One can have a determinate universal that somehow articulates individuals, which is this connection between the essence conceived as universal and the essence has conceived as individuals in Islamic philosophy. Again, I'm definitely oversimplifying here, and we would need to have a deeper discussion, and I myself would have to study better Izutsu in order to elaborate this more profoundly. But nevertheless, what I hope is becoming clear is by exploring those different traditions, Izutsu shows us different possibilities of combinations between concepts that might not be clear at first sight if we take a historical perspective of those concepts. So for instance, if one was to discuss the concept of essence in a very analytical fashion, let's say contemporarily, and try to discuss this, one might not even consider the possibility that one does not have to connect essence with individuality, that one could think of universal essences as such, for instance. And this is one understanding you get when you go and study Islamic philosophy as Izutsu did. Or again, one might think, if one has only contact, for instance, with the Buddhist traditions or at least the Indian Buddhist traditions, that there's no way you could possibly think of the deeper level of consciousness or this background of reality in terms of essence, right? Because there you have no distinctions. But then you come to this study of the Advaita Vedanta and you see that, well, it's no coincidence that Shankara was called a crypto-Buddhist either way, but still you get to see that there's also a difference there, because he's connecting a different understanding of the background of level, this background level of consciousness, to which we can attach also this concept of essence. And by exploring those different possible combinations of concepts, this seems to me to be a way of not only of doing intercultural philosophy, because I think a lot of doing intercultural philosophy has to do with that. I mean, you see that there are some intersections, some concepts that are commonly used, or one could commonly use at least to understand different traditions. But at the same time, you see that those concepts are used differently. They are combined with different concepts in each of those traditions in a way that sometimes would be considered absurd by the other tradition or completely untenable. But it's precisely the fact that those combinations are made different that makes this study interesting, that makes this an interesting way of approaching the study of the historical philosophical traditions and also of those very concepts themselves, because this allows us to try to explore the different possibilities that are contained within them. But moreover, it's by this clarification, one can reach a more refined grasp of what one is trying to propose systematically, which I think is Izutsu's point, even when he comes to Zen Buddhism, and somehow seems to be claiming that Zen Buddhism provides the quintessential Eastern perspective on the relationship between the deeper level of consciousness and the superficial level. It's only because then he can distinguish this approach from all the others by saying, look, here, it's true, you have essence in a way only on this superficial level, but in a way that doesn't separate essence from being, doesn't separate essence from the inarticulated being. Rather, in the things themselves as they are in the world, we are already in touch with this deeper level. We don't have to change what things are in order to reach this connection. We don't have to eliminate multiplicity, to dissolve multiplicity. And it would make sense to me that this is the great contribution he seems to find in Eastern philosophy, because I would guess that he assumes that Western philosophy is lost between the extremes of nihilism or this strong sense of essentialism, in which either things exist, essentially has separated, or there is nothing. There's no articulation. There's just no sense, no meaning. And maybe he's trying to show that through Eastern philosophy grasped in this specific approach of Zen, one can overcome this dichotomy and thus overcome nihilism, so to speak. That would be one of my guesses. Maybe I'm not sure if I would be I'm seeing this too much through the lens of the Kyoto school, but this could be a possible take. But I'm going to finish here because I already talked a little bit too much, a little bit over my time, I think. Thank you for your time, your patience. And I'm not sure what you guys think better. Should we leave the questions for the end, or should we have the questions right next the presentations? What do you think?
I would suggest at the end, but I don't have.
Yeah, okay. We can do it at the end then. Perfect.
I agree.
So, thank you very much. So now I'm going to move on to our next presentation from Professor Rodrigo Guerizoli from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, who is going to talk about some medieval philosophers in T. Izutsu's Conscience and Essence. Thank you, Rodrigo.
Thank you so much, Lucas, for this presentation. Thank you so much for organizing this meeting of this group and to host us even remotely on the University of São Paulo. Thank you for the people on the background. There are really surely people working with you and organizing this meeting, and I think we need to be very grateful to all of them. Thank you so much. Well, I have a question. I have a text that I will read. Do you want me to put this text on the screen, or yes?
Sure. Yeah, sure. If you can.
Okay.
That would be good.
Let me wait.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have this. Well,
it's the green button.
And then wait, share screen.
Yeah.
Okay, and now I need to find it. I think this is here.
Yeah, there you go. We can see it.
You can see it. Wait, but yeah. I can't. The problem. No,
you can't.
I can't. Why?
Maybe you have to click in the actual text now.
I don't know why. I have it here. Move good button. Are you sharing the screen? I have everything, but I have the text very small in front of me.
Because you're seeing it in the Zoom screen, I think. But you can go to the text itself, to the window where the text itself is.
The problem then well, okay, and then just let me see if I can, but I can't move the text. Well, I'll stop sharing and do it again. Wait a minute.
Okay. No, never mind.
No, again. Share screen, and then I have here my text, and then I share it. Now I think it's back.
Okay, good.
Now it's okay. Now it's okay. Okay.
Perfect.
Well, I'll read it. Okay, are you seeing the text? Are you listening to me? It's okay? Everything's okay?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Lucas. Well, although it's not exactly easy to summarize the aim of the main work of the Japanese intellectual Toshihiko Izutsu, we can say still too vaguely that Consciousness and Essence is about exploring the way different traditions understand the relation we establish every time we recognize an object of the word, not as unique object, able to be referred to by a proper name, as in "this is Peter," but rather as an instance of a species or genus, as in "Peter is a human being" or "Peter is a living being." That is, as something that bears some relevant resemblance to another. This similarity, in turn, would require a foundation, a why, and the role of the notion of essence would be precisely to provide such an answer. Peter and Paul are both human beings because in some way they share the same essence, which nevertheless does not make them indistinguishable from each other. This is the way we operate in the world. But, asks Izutsu, does this state of affair correspond to the way the world itself is constituted? Is the essence supposedly common to Peter and Paul an item of the reality, or just a way we, through our consciousness, objectify the world? When one analyzes such a project from the standpoint of what is commonly called Western philosophy, one realizes that, in fact, there are several moments in that history in which the notion of essence and the question about its experimental reality and accessibility have occupied a prominent place. It is enough to remember, for example, the Kantian project of a Copernican revolution in the relationship between word and thought, which could be easily translated in those terms. Apparently less radical, also in the medieval tradition, a discussion about the reality of essences was at the center of attention. Often in that context, it was not a question of doubting our possibility of access to the world as such, which seemed minimally guaranteed by our innate sensory capacities, but of assessing the need to bear the weight of the ontological commitment apparently involved in accepting the experimental existence of essences somehow shared by different individuals. This is the well-known problem of universal, which effectively marks a considerable portion of medieval philosophical reflection, although it has been convincingly shown that it is not appropriate to see it as a vanishing point towards which all philosophical discussions of the time are headed. In what follows, I would like to explore a bit the role that medieval authors, through their reflections on the relationship between consciousness and essence, mind and world, play in Izutsu's work. What animates this undertaking is the hypothesis that Izutsu finds in them a privileged interlocutor with whom he may even flatly disagree, but who speaks his language and who can thus make the dialogue between East and West go beyond a mere and intractable deep disagreement. The first thing to note here is the relevance rightly given in Consciousness and Essence to non-Latin medieval philosophy. This is certainly due in some measure to Izutsu's own academic profile as a specialist in Iranian and Islamic studies. But systematically, the decision also makes sense, insofar as we shall see, it is an Islamic author, Avicenna, from the beginning of the 11th century, who kind of sets the conceptual stage in which the medieval debate about the reality of essences takes place. Besides Avicenna, Ibn Arab is also a prominent interlocutor. His works date back to the first half of the 13th century, and he represents above all the effort which would also be present in the Eastern tradition to hypostasize the notion of essence into the archetype, which seems to indicate a decidedly Platonic reading of it. The presence of Latin authors in the book is, in its turn, more scattered. In the main part of the text, I could find 8 references to Avicenna, not counting his frequent presence in the first appendix of the book, the so-called Islamic philosophical fragment, and 16 references to Ibn Arabi. I identify also 9 references to Duns Scotus, who writes in the passage from the 13th to the 14th century, and only 2 to the most influential Latin author of the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas, one of them in a purely biographical context. In the final version of this text, I intend to explore the role played by these 4 authors, Ibn Arab, Avicenna, Aquinas, and Scotus, in the overall dynamic of consciousness in essence. For now, however, I will devote myself to the duo that requires the least justification, either as to the relationship to each other or as to their treatment of the core ideas of the work, namely Avicenna and, very briefly, Duns Scotus. From the perspective of the guiding question of the word, we can say that Avicenna is portrayed by Zutsu as fundamentally having broken with a too naive description of our access to the words, a description by which we would believe without any further ado that the fact that we successfully refer to things around us by means of name that signifies them, directly or indirectly, guarantees that we have access to their essences, to what they really are, so to speak. This can occur. Avicenna does not denies it, but he reminds us that we cannot forget that the essence internalized by the concept has properties that simply contradict those it actually needs to have in order to play its role as the foundation for the attribution of common names to objects. In fact, the fundamental problem here is this: the use of common names. In fact, the fundamental problem here is this: the use of common names imply that they can be used on several occasions and the predicates of different things. Now, this requires that they be universal. That is, that the information they convey about the essence of the object they name be marked by a being able to be said of many. Thus, Avicenna notes, by recognizing something as a member of a species and giving it a common name, we are at the same time grasping that very essence of that which we name we are at the same time grasping that the very essence of that which we name is universal. But as much as Peter and Paul as human beings, the essence of each of them is their own. In no sense, Peter is essentially Paul. In short, in the concept, the essence is universal. In the thing, it is individual. The Avicennian solution to the problem consists in recognizing something that for Zutsu, and rightly so, in fact, constitutes an ontological monster, namely the reality of an essence that cannot be identified either as the essence internalized in the concept, which is necessarily universal, or the essence internalized in the object, which is necessarily individual. I quote, in the essence, he's talking about Avicenna. In the essence discourses, this is Avicenna, puts the emphasis of his researches on the individual essence and on the universal essence, And the progress he made was to put the reality of a still pre-existent, so to say, pre-universal essence, complicating the situation even more. This essence pre-existing both the universalized essence in the concept and the individualized essence in the thing, Avicenna names nature. And indeed, it is an ontological problematic item, for accepting it means giving up the idea that individual and universal consist of attributes that disjunctively necessarily apply to everything that exists. There are, therefore, in the Avicennian words, items, the essences, that in themselves are neither universal nor individual, but are common. That is, they may receive the attributes of universality in the concept and individuality in the things, but they have nonetheless some ontological consistency independent of this. Izutsu's proposed reconstruction of the Avicennian understanding of the notion of essence and his idea of a pre-universal common nature is, in broad outline, quite orthodox, even if perhaps one could find in the person author a better elaborated justification of his apparently extravagant ontology. Also correct is the relation Izutsu makes between the Avicennian doctrine and the philosophical production of Duns Scotus. He emphasized, namely, Scotus's interest in underlying the actual aspect of that index of individuality which accompanies each essence in its manifestation in the world, and which constitutes it and an individual essence. In this sense, he shows, in fact, Scotus departing from the question of essence. One would not find there the ultima realitas entis, but rather one would find it in the exeitas, that is, in that perfect, actual, though finite, principle of individuation. Scotus' problem would be then to conceive the relationship between essence and exeity, but Izutsu comes to this. It is illusory to want to solve such a problem without first taming the Avicennian ontological monster. And I quote, the problem, he's talking about Scotus, the problem is to want to connect the thisness, the exeity, necessarily with an ontological neither universal nor individual pre-essence, something which is actually not yet an essence. Thus, Avicenna and Scotus are for Izutsu important milestones on the path of philosophical reflection on the reality of essences in their relations to thought and consciousness. As for Avicenna, his important would be in overcoming a naive conception of essence, a usage dear to the dynamics of our superficial consciousness, leaving, however, the enormous problem of attributing a coherent ontological status to that not universal nor individual real essence. Scotus, in turn, would have emphasized the individual element of the real as his touchstone. Stressing the composite aspect of reality, we must always be thought of as a unity between the common, the essence, and the individual, the exeity. All this seems basically correct, but I'm not convinced by one thing, namely by the absence of what I think is also worth as an essential contribution of Scotus to the subject, namely his extremely complex and well-founded attempt, recorded in many of his pages, to make the acceptance of that Avicennian ontological monster a requirement of philosophy and knowledge in general. Thank you so much for your attention. I will stop sharing. Okay.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. That was great. And so now we can move on to Jun, to Professor Jun Ono, who is assistant professor in philosophy at the Jichi Medical University in Japan. And he's going to talk about Izutsu's metaphysics of verbum. By the way, as usual, I'm presenting everyone but myself. I'm currently also a substitute professor of history of philosophy in the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, where Professor Rodrigo also teaches. So please, Jun, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucas, for organization and everything. I would like to share my PowerPoint. Can you see my PowerPoint? Yeah, good. So my presentation will focus on the topic positioning of essence in Izutsu Toshihiko, especially main work, consciousness and essence. But First, I would like to describe his work throughout his life and its relationship to my topic. Izuzu began his linguistic research in the late 1930s and 1940s. The languages he studied were mainly European and Asian languages. His first paper was an analysis of Akkadian affixes. From his 20s, Izuzu taught Chinese Basque language and also Quine's philosophy, American philosopher Quine at the university, as well as ancient Greek thoughts and Russian literature. And always he focused on natural mysticism, especially from the perspective of semantic generation. Also in Akkadian studies and in Russian literature. In his lectures on linguistics or introduction to linguistics in the late 40s and beginning of 50s, he attempted to elucidate semantic generation from grammatical analysis. In his lectures on semantics, he relied on the discussions of universals in scholastic philosophy in Europe, Saussure, and other modern theories of linguists. Also modern empiricism, Bergson, Russell, Ryle, and so on. In the 1950s and 60s, this issue, so semantic generation, was also pursued in his Arabic studies. He began translating the Quran into Japanese in 1941, and doing so, he examined the conceptual history of pre-Quranic Arabic, Quranic Arabic, and post-Quranic theology and jurisprudence over more than 1,000 years. And in doing so, he described the semantic structure of Arabic in a synchronic way and diachronic way too. In 1960s, he compared various Arabic and Chinese concepts of mysticism. From them, Izuzu tried to describe a semantic generation mainly using Arabic, Sanskrit, and Chinese. And this time, Izuzu, on the other hand, pursues the possibilities of concepts from those classical Asian traditions while conducting philological and historical research. In other words, he structures philosophical concepts or philosophemes of various languages on the basis of classics, and then he makes them interact ideally, free from time axis and regionality in order to pursue the possibility of concepts. This is still in 60s and 70s. And at around this period, Izuzu began working with Raymond Glibansky and a logical positivist Alfred Ayer. Especially, they worked together in an institute, an International Institute for Philosophy in Paris. And their main purpose was intellectual dialogue. Their aims overlapped with some of the subjects that Izuzu had originally been considering. So, sorry, I skipped one slide. So here, maybe I will show still the second one. Izuzu's theme of semantic generation comes at the core of understanding the others as semantic understanding. Izuzu compares mysticism in Arabic and Chinese, which he describes as an ideal dialogue between concepts. So gradually, we are coming to the time of consciousness and essence, I think. And this is a case study to cross ground cross-cultural mutual understanding. And then Izutsu, at the request of Klibanski and others, explored philosophical possibilities of Zen Buddhism in 1970s, as you know. That kind of dialogue is a dialogue that, a Zen dialogue is a kind of dialogue that recreate concepts, as Izutsu says. In order to grasp semantic generation, or let's say generating new concepts, Izutsu discussed not only Zen Buddhism, but also Taoist thoughts, I Ching, Confucianism, Neo-Confucianism, and East Asian shamanism at the Eranos conference. In addition to these Indian Buddhist, Islamic, Jewish thoughts were discussed in our book, Consciousness and Essence. Also, Izutsu wrote a paper on Maimonides in 40s and Ibn Arabi in 44. In 1984, he gave a 3-month lecture in London comparing Sanskrit text and Arabic translations from 10th century. So in this way, if we see his lifelong work in this way, we can say Consciousness and Essence is a kind of digest of his work, I think. So now I'd like to describe my topic on Webum. As mentioned above, Izutsu has taken up semantic generation since his youth and has been trying to create a universal conceptual horizon or ideal structure for humankind in order to gain an integrated overview of Eastern thoughts as a whole. Consciousness and Essence is the first distinct step toward bringing together all of his previous work. The phenomenon he has pointed out as semantic generation is now called self-development of word, or verbum in Latin. Furthermore, in an article, Dialogue and Beyond Dialogue, it is called verbum aeternum. What Izutsu means by these terms is the moment of experience and its verbalization. At that moment of experience, nothing is verbalized. Language is still in a state of fundamental beyond verbal or averbal in his expression, but it does not mean that there is no linguistic consciousness, although the intentionality of consciousness is not evoked as an objectification of something. The intentionality itself must be there. It is at the level where the very intentionality itself is about to be set in motion. Izutsu focuses on the level from there to the level where it is fully functioning as a language. So how is intentionality understood in Eastern traditions? So I think this is the topic, main topic of his book, Consciousness and Essence. Intentionality brings the object to consciousness, as you know. In other words, the essence of object is oriented. In Eastern thoughts, intentionality is divided into several types. So now I'm describing, I'm talking about typification or a typology by Izutsu. So you can see in slide bottom. This Izutsu chose posing of essence as one of the coordinate axes regulating the ideal structuring of Eastern philosophy. From here, I would like to use a diagram which I wrote, which I made. So please look at the diagram. I will explain from the right. So first is to divide the positions into those that deny essence and those that affirm it. Can you see this figure? Good. If one denies essence, one can then divide into denying or affirming the empirical world. The Madhyamika school of Nagarjuna is a position that denies essence as well as the empirical world. If one affirms the empirical world, one must choose whether experience is direct or mediated. If one believes that the world is direct, then this is the position of Zen Buddhism or Chan Buddhism. Zen denies the reality of essence, but affirms the reality of experience. Those who believe that the world is given to consciousness in mediate way are divided into two groups. The Vedanta school holds that the mediation is an illusion. The Ibn Arabi school believes that the only essence unfolds in stages. However, I think is it said this Ibn Arabi school is also considered to belong to the group that affirms the reality of essence as absolute being. Now, I'm going to the position that essence is real. This position is quite very predominant. So it is the left 3 quarters from the figure. This position can be divided into 2 major categories. One is the position that essence is apparent. It is the left end. And the other is the position that essence is inapparent, middle in the figure. The position that essence is apparent is an Asian version of realism. I think he used the word realism, or in German, Begriffsrealismus. In Izutu's expression, this is the 3rd type of essence affirmation. The position that essence is inapparent is the 2nd and 1st type of essence affirmation. This included everything from realism to quasi-realism to nominalism, I think. But I think I have to discuss about these topics. So, but I will go further. The first type of essence affirmation does not regard essence as a symbol. This type is divided into 3 positions. One position regards essence as a hyactatus, so business of the individual, and denies universals. Second one affirms universals, and the 3rd one insists on the fusion of hyactatus and universals. The 2nd type of essence affirmation regards essence as a symbol. This 1st type of essence affirmation is further divided into 2. Namely, one position that regards the primordial essence as a personal, so personal God, and the other position that regards it is impersonal or natural. The former can be considered emanationist, but probably this is rather due to diachronic or historical fusion. The latter tends towards shamanism, but some positions have emanationism. Izutu sees the influence of Greek philosophy in Shingon Buddhism, so in Kukai, but one cannot say for the moment if its emanationism is synchronic or diachronic. At present, we have to say it is a commonality that transcends history. The I Ching's emanationism is older than Plotkin's one, so it is a synchronic commonality, we can say. Now, you can see maybe a little bit better. In consciousness and essence, Izutsu classified the ways of positioning of essence in preparation for the ideal development of philosophical dialogue on essence. As in my figure diagram, we can find in his classification divergent points of view on essence. Those divergences can be called places of dialogue. I have not found in consciousness and essence any conditions for or factors that cause all the divergences, which I'm marked with a question mark. Further, I would like to make a 3D model of this kind of diagram in the future to show the fusion of these fusion between these types. And all the possibilities of human thinking patterns with respect to the positioning of essence is maybe in this diagram, if Izutsu has right. So this is because Izutsu sought to examine the relationship between verbalization and experience given to consciousness. They are all patterns that verbum stimulated by experience unfolds itself. Most of those possibilities are unconscious in the mind of each individual. Izutsu has made conscious the crossroads through which all patterns pass. In other words, he assembled them all into one structure. He tried to internalize that structure again. Then, by doing so, the patterns would have dialogued with each other ideally in his mind. From this, he hoped that a new philosophy would emerge, I think, just as a new culture emerges from cross-cultural exchange. So I tried to make together in one diagram. So maybe I made quite many mistakes. So please correct me if you find something error and so on. So this is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jun. That was great. Thank you so much. It's really nice to see that in a diagram. You really brought into images what we were talking about before. So that was really, really useful. So let's move on then to our next presentation. Unfortunately, that would be at first Professor Ralf Müller, but since he has had trouble with his train, he's stuck in a train and he won't be able to enter our session today. We'll move on already to Professor Rosa, who is Associate Professor at the Aichi Prefectural University in Japan, and is going to talk about how essential is the essential. Kegon's Ri has an exemplar of Izutsu's philosophy. Thank you, Rosa, for what will be no doubt an essential presentation of our group.
I hope so. Okay, thank you, Lucas. Yeah, June there just did a beautiful little diagram that shows the lovely syncretic style of Izutsu and how he brings together so many traditions. Unfortunately, I'm more of a vandal and I'm going to disrupt it and create a lot of divisions, okay? I'm not trying to start a fight, but in order to think through Izutsu, I'm going to set Izutsu against what I would see as an opposing viewpoint, just to see if I can make clearer what Izutsu is trying to do and say. Now, Izutsu, while he does seem to bring together an awful lot of different philosophies, does have a clear division in his mind, okay? Yeah, as I said, even though we've been working with this book, Consciousness and Essence, I've also been looking at this book, Cosmos and Anti-Cosmos. And one essay is called that, Cosmos and Anti-Cosmos. Another essay is this about Jiji Muge, Lili Muge, which is Kegon Buddhism, okay? For Izutsu, he divides the world into East and West, okay? Toyo, Seiyo, okay? And the East is non-essentializing philosophies. The West is essentializing philosophies. Okay, I have before expressed my slight opposition to the simplisticness with which he divides the world. And you've advised me that I should calm down about this a bit, okay? And not get too bothered about it. So I have. I'm going to accept it as a necessary fiction. I'm going to enter Izutsu's little world and accept it, okay? East and West. And I've tried to decide, right, using Izutsu's own example. In this book, he says that Kegon-kyo is a good paradigm of Eastern philosophy. Actually, I'll just put up all my quotes I'm going to use in this talk, okay? So you can look at the quotes while I'm talking. You can see me as well, yeah? Okay, that's good. Sorry, I'll just shut down. Oh yeah, here, it's gone. Okay, yeah, here he says it. Oh, sorry, I didn't translate that. But he says, Kegon, with its idea of Jiji Muge, is one common essential paradigm. The rest of the sentence says kind of it's a paradigm of Eastern thinking, okay? And then I thought, okay, that's Eastern thinking, Kegon-kyo, round, we'll pick one. Western thinking, what's a good example of an essentializing Western philosophy? And then I thought, Confucianism, okay? And he himself would agree with me. This is a quote from Cosmos, Anti-Cosmos, okay? I'll just read it here, okay? The universal law in Confucianism was called Do Dento Ten, later becoming the more philosophical Li, okay? That's Li, usually translated as reason and logic, okay? It is an innate essence of things and events, okay? Yeah, okay, I don't need to go on more about it, but he does note that he highlights this word Li and links it to Confucianism, okay? And, you know, sees Confucianism as an essentializing philosophy, okay? Whereas the others, Taoism, Buddhism, are on the other side. Okay. Kegon-kyo, why is Kegon philosophy the paradigm of philosophies? It's because its concept here of Jiji Muge and also its concept of Lili Muge, which I didn't write, okay? Lili Muge, okay. These two concepts describe how, sorry, this G here, G is kind of, how would you translate that? You could just, I would translate it as events, okay? Maybe phenomenon if you want to get it close to consciousness. But the idea is that events do happen, but anything that we use to divide events, okay, any line between them, any divisions, differentiation, are momentary and fluid. That they are articulations of kind of a partial truth, okay, that are and built on an ultimate truth. They're kind of shadows of an ultimate truth, okay, which is kind of an inarticulateness that is based on nothingness, okay, that the GG, the event flows, okay, and we see them as separate events, but really they flow without any muge, any kind of external division between them, okay? And that's why it all goes back to, it's all based on this concept of Li, okay? Which he connects with nothingness, okay? Here's a comment he makes in that essay. He says, in other words, the emptiness that is realized at the end point of the process, the primordial conversion to nothingness of existence, is now something moving actively as the limitless creative source of ontological energy. In this form, the negative is flipped around to face the affirmative, and the emptiness that is converted into the somethingness is the Li in Kegon philosophy. Sorry, the point is that he's the Li, the G, the event is based upon the Li, which is the nothingness, okay? Okay, now as you might have spotted that up here, Li is connected with Confucianism, and is its etymology is to do with lines on a tree or on marble, okay? Okay, divisions, okay? Here in Kegon, Li, the same word, is equated with nothingness, okay? I'll come back to that, okay? I'll come back to that. Okay, now this all has, for example, implications for language, okay? Language works by dividing the world into separate self-contained units, as in words, okay? But again, this kind of word, which we'd use to label event, is based on a certain kind of partial truth, okay? And a kind of, you could call it, as a partial truth is not the full truth, perhaps a slight falsity. Here's what Izutsu has to say about language, okay? From the book Honshitsu, Ishiki to Honshitsu. They might have written this already in English, I've just discovered. But anyway, here's my translation, okay? Okay. When existence made articulate and crystallized is seen by us as something innately fixed and static, it hides in the shadows of its own crystallized form, evading any revelations of the fundamental grounding of existence prior to any articulation. So ultimately, language is slightly false, okay? Okay. In this non-essentializing Eastern view, okay? But, okay, here's where we can question this. Is this true? How, if this is true, if language is a false crystallization, how is language meaningful for us, okay? Language, we don't go to language, language comes to us. We don't name the world, and the world names itself for us. That's why the world is meaningful for us. We're born into a language, okay, which we don't control. It comes with us. We're born, you know, whatever native language you're born into, okay. And when we ignore this, when we smash to bits the innate, our experience of language having an innate meaning for us, are we not then opening ourselves up to the nihility and, you know, disorder that is supposedly is on the Western side rather than the Eastern side? To back up my argument, I'll pick a Western philosopher. I'll pick the Confucianist Junshi. Okay, Junshi was a disciple of Confucius. Okay, and here's what Junshi has to say in his book, or his section of his book called "Rectifying Names." Okay, he says, okay, do I have time to kind of read the big quotes? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. This is Burton Watson translation. He's always great. When the king sets about regulating the names, if the names and the realities to which they apply are made fixed and clear, crystallized, so they can carry out the way and communicate his intentions to others, then he may guide the people with circumspection and unify them. Hence, to split words and recklessly make up new names, throwing the names that have already been established into confusion, leading the people into doubt and delusion, and causing men to argue and contend with each other is a terrible evil and should be punished in the same way that one punishes those who tamper with tallies or weights and measures. Okay? In other words, when you cheat with words, it's like you're cheating with weights. Okay, you want to buy 30 centimeters of silk, and I only give you this amount. Okay, okay. The point is, okay, how essential are words? Okay, it's okay. We can play around with puns and koans and whatever, but Junshi's point is that for justice is based on us recognizing that we understand words together, that there's actually Roger Echo said it, neither well no I don't, maybe I'm misquoting you, but neither universal nor individual but common. Okay, you know, let's think about bananas and cucumbers. Okay, maybe in some cultures bananas and cucumbers have the same word, but they can always be distinguished. And if we don't distinguish them, I can cheat you. I could sell you, you could order 100 bananas from me and I give you 100 cucumbers, and we go to court and you say, you cheated me, I gave you all this money and I got cucumbers, not bananas. And I go, oh, well, you're crystallizing language, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? It does have serious social consequences, okay, when we dismiss language, okay? You know, it also, you know, yeah, our meaning, our sense of meaning in the world, our sciences all come from being able to rectify names, okay, through our senses. I won't read out the second quote here, but from Junchi says, look, you know, it's the reason why we can rectify names is because we innately as humans can sense, use through our senses, know which words go with which. You know, we have a, you know, okay, common meaning, common, you know, we have common understanding of words. Okay, okay. Now let me go back to this point about the two Lees. Okay, Lee. I'll just write it here again so you know what I'm talking about. Lee. Okay. As I said, Izutsu himself has pointed out that for Confucianism, Li is an extremely important concept. It's the principle by which you theoretically can divide the world, okay? Li in Kegon is nothingness, okay? Now, that could be a coincidence, a homonym, you know, words can have, the same word can have different meanings, okay? That doesn't mean that words, you know, that's not anti-language thing to say, it's just the way language works. But perhaps there is something common about the way Confucianism and Kegon use Li, because Li, in Confucianism, Li is contrasted with Qi, okay, energy, okay, you know, the Qi as in Tai Chi Qi, you know, Qi, okay, and then as we saw in Kegon, it's contrasted with Ji, okay, which could be event, phenomenon, whatever. But either way, Li is being defined as that which can't be one more particular in the world, can't be one more phenomenon, object, whatever, in the world. It's the utter abstractness of the Li, okay, and when you have yeah, my point is that both, not to jump ahead, but both Kegon and Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism both recognize that what's not Li for us, the key or the G, are to some extent socially constructed, okay, as in they are defined by our common, okay, our common language, okay. They are derived from what is not Li belongs to what is developed by our social consciousness, okay. And when you see the world that way, you have a choice. You can either go back to the Li, okay, which seems to be what Kegon is arguing for. Go back to the Li, which is more true than the nothingness, okay, that's not entangled in our socially constructed Maya, okay. Or the Neo-Confucianist point was, don't do that, because that's going back to meaninglessness, okay. Neo-Confucianism has an interesting kind of genealogy at this dialectic when it hit Tokugawa, Japan. Okay, I'm not going to say it all because it's too long. Okay, but looking at Murayama Masao's book about Tokugawa Japan and Neo-Confucianism, okay, I'll just read this quote, yeah? Okay, I hope I'm not really over time. In his Ogiya Surai, the great Japanese Neo-Confucianist opinion, both the Sung theory of the primacy of Li over Ki, and Soko and Jinsai, their other Japanese Neo-Confucianists before Surai, theory of ether, Ki, were meaningless. They were the result of the abuse of the private intellect by theorists who were so arrogant as to draw conclusions about the principle of heaven from human norms. Thus, without leaving the framework of Confucian philosophy, Surai transformed Sung rationalism into its very opposite, irrationalism. Okay, sorry, just to, it's a quote that's a bit out of context, but the point is, Surai's development of Neo-Confucianism was to recognize that we have to accept our world is socially constructed, invented, okay, and work with that, okay, realize that we are in charge of our own society, okay. We are the ones that use language and develop it and create our own institutions. Okay, so anyway, my point is, the difference perhaps between Kegon and Confucianism was that Kegon was saying, go back to the Li, and the Confucian was saying, don't do that because you're going back to meaninglessness, okay? Okay, perhaps, and that's an argument that Kegon needs to come back on, perhaps, okay? Okay, sorry, that's all I to talk about.
Great. Thank you, Jose. That was very nice. Okay, so we can move on to our next presentation now, which is going to be from Professor Hans-Peter, who is Professor of Philosophy and German at the Kwansei Gakuin University in Nishimoya, Japan. And he's going to talk about thinking in layers, Nishida and Izutsu on consciousness, which is going to be no doubt very interesting, bring this connection with the Kyoto School. So thank you very much, Hans.
Yeah, thank you again, Lucas, for having me. And I will also show you my paper here. Can everybody see it? Right, okay. I changed the title a little bit. I added another 2 words, and now it is called Thinking Layers. It's Izutsu and Nishida on consciousness and radical indeterminacy. I must say ahead that I have learned quite a lot from your presentation, Lucas, and you will see that there are some overlaps between us. And I much appreciated Junichi's diagram, which really lucidly exhibited the vast approach of maybe this is the real monstrous thing here, which is going on here, this monster of ontology, which Rodrigo talked about, is a monster of theory here in a way. And also there will be some overlap with Rosa's concern, I think, but from a different angle. Yeah, well, I read it out so, and you can follow along. As Hans-Georg Gadamer noted, quote, the essential nature of our historical consciousness consists not in the restoration of the past, but in the thoughtful mediation with contemporary life. It's a quote from Truth and Method. Our situation of contemporary life is in part informed by the emergence of world philosophy. Other elements are the linguistic turn, the successful attacks on conventional empiricism and analytic philosophy, and a revival of of scholarship in Kant and post-Kantian philosophy. This situation invites us to explore possible connections across the borders of philosophical traditions without being impeded by older images of Western philosophy, often characterized in terms of metaphysics of presence or logocentrism. So my point here is, I hesitate to go straight forward into Itsutsu. I'd rather see my enterprise some kind of mediated approach by problems and theories right now going on, which are on the philosophical agenda. As far as it concerns Itsutsu's problems here. In my talk, I wish to juxtapose the theories of consciousness developed by Nishida Kitaro and Itsutsu Toshihiko against the backdrop of this situation. Nishida and Itsutsu both claim to represent a distinctly Eastern perspective. However, while Nishida establishes his standpoint by appropriating and transforming idealist concepts, Itsutsu employs more recent theories, such as post-Husserlian phenomenology and psychoanalysis. And yet, both of them offer a theory of layered consciousness, the ultimate layer of which is described in Eastern anti-substantialist terms as a field of nothingness or emptiness. As some have argued, like Davis and Casolis and so on, this Eastern quality of thought is particularly suited for contributing to the newly emerging discipline of cross-cultural philosophy, which is an offspring, in my view, of world philosophy, what is going on. As a matter of fact, Nishida and Itsutsu are already doing philosophy in a cross-cultural key. Drawing from recent Kant and Hegel's scholarship, I wish to inquire into what they could contribute to the ongoing debate on consciousness. At the center of Nishida's and Itsutsu's philosophy lies the experience of radical indeterminacy, that is, of the above mentioned fields of nothingness or emptiness. While Nishida articulates this experience by a systematic investigation into the structure of self-awareness, jikaku, Itsutsu renders radical indeterminacy as a kind of common denominator for what he calls Eastern philosophy, and consequently his account of Buddhist, Taoist, Confucianist, Islamic, and Judaic positions is a synchronic one. In the following, I will briefly recap the positions of Nishida and Itsutsu before I bring them into connection with results generated in recent Kant and Hegel scholarship. So since Nishida in many respects relies on the philosophy of German idealism, for him the problem of self-consciousness or self-awareness is central, but particularly in his epistemological investigations in Hata Laku Mono Kara Miru Monoe from 1927. These are creative adaptations of Kant's notion of transcendental perception and Hegel's concrete universal. But also in the later texts on acting in intuition, the proximity to Hegel is evident. As these connections are showing, Nishida insists on some form of activity on the side of the perceiving or acting subject, to explain the successful carrying out of perceptions and actions. And here I'm thinking about this notion of enveloping and mirroring he is using. However, as Nishida warns us, this activity must not be understood within the subject-object relation, but rather as enveloping in terms of perception, or in practical terms as a dialectical movement, quote, from what is created to what creates. These activities correspond to various levels of self-awareness. As John Krummel has shown, this self-awareness has to be understood dialectically. On Krummel's view, which I think is correct, Nishida's dialectics concerns the epistemology of place, human agency, the world, and religion. And these dimensions are developmental in that by passing through them, self-awareness gradually deepens, it becomes more profound. Ultimately, Nishida reduces these forms of self-aware activity to the religious sphere of absolute nothingness, which she renders as the matrix out of which all these subjective activities emerge. At the bottom of all determinate knowledge lies radical indeterminacy. By pointing at absolute nothingness, Nishida wishes to overcome dualism, the subject-object split, by giving an account of its origin. We should note here that Nishida does not give an explanation for how out of this origin subject and object, and subsequently the knowledge the subject acquires of the object can emerge, or in fact emerge, is to be understood concretely. To be sure, Nishida couches his explanations in the language of logic, rather peculiar logic to be sure, and his appeal to a dimension of radical indeterminacy makes sense in this regard. However, we will have to address the problem of how to translate this into our, to quote Gadamer again, contemporary life situation. Now I move to Itsutsu. In contrast to Nishida, Itsutsu is following the phenomenological tradition when he describes consciousness primarily as intentional consciousness. However, following Itsutsu, consciousness is layered, and two layers are to be discriminated, and this has Lucas already elaborated. Surface consciousness, or everyday consciousness, and the so-called deep consciousness. Moreover, to both of them corresponds a specific class of essences, and this also Lucas has already explained. As to the surface consciousness, essences are indispensable for rendering entities and the world intelligible. To make his point, Itsutsu refers to Jean-Paul Sartre's description of nausea. For Sartre, the experience of the radical indeterminacy of the chestnut tree in a public park is the phenomenological proof for the absolute contingency of existence, a problem Sartre was concerned with since his student days at the École Normale Supérieure. And Itsutsu interprets this episode slightly differently when he claims that in the experience of nausea, for a moment, and this is a quote, deep consciousness becomes visible. And here I quote from my German translation, which I translated into English, but checked with the Japanese original. And this applies to all the other translations from now on. As Itsutsu holds, looking at how one is coping with this kind of experience is crucial for determining the difference between Eastern and Western philosophy. While for Western philosophy, the experience of radical indeterminacy has to be domesticated by devising concepts of essence. For the Eastern tradition, this dimension is the original home ground wherein it takes its stand. Says Izutsu, intending the not being is the original condition of deep consciousness. It is a non-objective, non-intentional consciousness. It is a non-consciousness. Everywhere in Eastern philosophy, this absolutely non-consciousness, this non-conscious consciousness, we can also call it meta-consciousness, is recognized as an experiential fact. Herein lies a fundamental distinctive feature of Eastern philosophy in general. This at first glance neutral description contains a more radical claim. According to Izutsu, avoiding the experience of radical indeterminacy makes us blind to the real truth, as he says, that is the ultimate foundation for the free play of things and the unhindered movement of relative and absolute truth, unquote. Instead, relying on the surface consciousness and the various notions of essence will grant us access only to conventional truth. The thrust of this argument is similar to a remark of Nishida, who claims that, quote, true philosophy has always taken its standpoint of self-awareness and even came into being by the standpoint of what I call the self-awareness of nothingness, a standpoint, as I may add, apparently yet to be realized by Western philosophers. On the other hand, Izutsu readily admits that even the philosopher from the East who has experienced the real truth must deal with the entities and everyday world. However, as he claims, as Izutsu claims, his eye, which is, quote, the eye that has seen the essenceless world, is calm, end quote. Which is to say that his coping is essentially different from that of a person inhabiting only the surface consciousness. But yet we have to ask, like in the case of Nishida, how the transition between the two worlds or the two spheres ought to be understood, and what the calmness of the philosopher's eye bears out for his perceptions and actions in this world. So I now will recap very briefly, the pertinent aspects of recent Kant and Hegel's scholarship before venturing an assessment, the appeal to radical indeterminacy. In recent scholarship on ideal theories of the structure of consciousness, emphasis is put on the anti-Cartesian thrust in Hegel's theoretical and practical philosophy. Speaking with Robert Brandom, this reflects the epistemological turn from certainty to necessity in the application of concepts, and the practical turn from descriptive to prescriptive conceptions of intentionality, both of which origin in Kant. By stressing Hegel's indebtedness to Kant, the notion of normativity becomes central for a novel reading of Hegel. Based on such informed reading, it becomes possible to take into account the social and historical inflections of Hegel's philosophy of spirit, and thus recount his narrative in the Phenomenology of Spirit in terms of a normatively robust account of how modern European societies came to self-authorize their hitherto unprecedented epistemological, moral, and aesthetical practices, and how these practices ought to be rationally justified within a commonly shared space of reason, a phrase from Wilfried Sellars. Terry Pinkard even goes so far to read the Phenomenology of Spirit as an exercise in, quote, the sociality of reason. I quote Robert Pippin, another of the main actors of this movement, from where we stand now, Pippin puts it, the distinctiveness of the human sciences following the Hegelian lead stems from the distinctiveness of human experience in being fraught with awe, in Saller's phrase, from the distinctive human capacity we might call our responsiveness to reasons, oughts, unquote. I think we would be ill-advised if we ignored these achievements when examining the phenomenon of consciousness today, be it consciousness in the Western context, or be it consciousness as explored by Izutsu or Nishida. I cannot go into detail, but it is fair to say that on the one hand, these novel readings of Kant and Hegel are suited to overcome the post-Heideggerian criticism of the so-called metaphysics of presence in the modern Western tradition. On the other hand, these readings certainly can help to throw a new light on the appropriations of German idealism by Kyoto School philosophers, particularly Nishida. Once the textbook image of Hegel as a monistic metaphysician of cosmic spirit has been refuted, it is possible to appreciate the proximity between Nishida's and Hegel's theories of self-consciousness. Both are given accounts on self-consciousness that are neither subjective in the sense of Cartesianism nor anti-subjective in the sense of postmodern authors like Deleuze, Derrida, and Foucault. And why I think these accounts can illuminate each other, there will remain a decisive difference regarding the foundational role of radical indeterminacy in Nishida. And this difference certainly reappears when we try to assess Izutsu's notion of consciousness against the backdrop of what has been said above. We would demand to know more about the bearings the transition from real truth to conventional truth has for the practices of justification and account giving, without which our everyday coping with the world could not be sustained. So what I'm trying to say here is that Nishida and Izutsu are occupying two poles, so to speak, two poles about philosophy of consciousness. And in between this pole, I think we can try to determine possibilities of so-called cross-cultural philosophy. And that's what in my final section I wish to very briefly spell out. And yet we might wish to reverse our perspective and emphasize that Izutsu and Nishida are trying to show that even the most rigorous way of thinking, be it Hegel's or Nishida's dialectical logic, rests on assumptions it impossibly can retrieve. Even if in Hegel's case, we insist on asking the question about relevance. So is this really relevance, that there is this absolute, this realm of absolute nothingness? We cannot but acknowledge the hesitation with regard to the human capacity of account giving we find in Izutsu and Nishida as a distinctly Eastern feature of thought. I think it is therefore no coincidence that most of the examples Izutsu provides are based on some kind of religious experience. Apparently in the East, the borders between religious and philosophical thinking are less strict or more porous than in the modern Western tradition. And while we in the West would hesitate to straightforwardly recognize religious thinking as philosophy proper, we cannot, and I think we should not, demand the same from our Eastern colleagues. With regard to cross-cultural philosophy, Izutsu and Nishida are helpful in that they point at the limits of such an enterprise. We have to admit that the Hegelian narrative of modernity and its practices of justification and account giving might be applicable only to the societies in the West. It cannot be forced onto non-Western traditions as a world historical model. At the same time, the distinctively modern values and ideas supported by these practices like freedom, equality, the rule of law, self-governance, and so on, by now have been promoted in non-Western societies for some time, as could be shown again in detail in their various appropriations. These ideas and values undergo sometimes radical cultural inflections with regard to the sense-making practices by which these ideas and values are actualized. Culture matters. Philosophical thinking can no longer avoid the reality of multiple modernities, to use Schmuel and Eisenstadt's notion. And I think this is one of the lessons we can learn from Eastern insights into the structure of consciousness and their appeal to radical indeterminacy. Thank you for listening to this rather crude and superficial presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hans, so much for your presentation. That was great. And I must say, I'm also very satisfied with the sequence of the presentations. I think it was great for us to end the presentations before the translation, from which Diogo is going to talk about, with a more contemporary perspective. So thank you very much. And now then we are going to move on to our last presentation for the session, and the only one which is going to be held in Portuguese, which is from Diogo, who is currently a professor at the Department of Eastern Letters and Eastern and Slav Letters. I'm not sure how to translate that into English, from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. Diogo, it's a great pleasure to have you here with us, and please feel free to begin. Of course, this talk is going to be in Portuguese, given that we are going to discuss the Brazilian Portuguese translation. So feel free to begin, Diogo.
Thank you, Lucas. And first of all, sorry for all my colleagues to speak in Portuguese here. So I'll try to make a small, account in English of what I'm going to talk here. And okay, let's go to Portuguese then. Obrigado, Lucas, e todo a organização desse evento, que é fantástico, né, e é essencial, principalmente no Brasil, em português, para nós vermos se a filosofia oriental, se é que a gente pode usar esse termo, né, ou filosofias não ocidentais, ganhem mais espaço dentro da academia brasileira. E para minha pequena contribuição para esse possível essa possível expansão da filosofia não ocidental no Brasil, e também como parte desse grupo que me coube a função de traduzir Izutsu, uma tradução que está indo aos poucos. Eu gostaria de falar de um pequeno aspecto da minha tradução, ou da tradução que eu proponho. E eu acabei de esquecer o título da minha própria apresentação. Acho que é Traduzindo Izutsu com Derrida. Era isso? Ok.
Desculpa, eu mesmo acabei não falando, mas era isso mesmo.
Então, eu vou compartilhar, porque a ideia deixa eu só encontrar aqui. Todos conseguem ver bem? Ok. São só as citações que eu gostaria de usar durante a minha apresentação. E eu acho que algumas pessoas no Brasil já ouviram falar de Izutsu nessa carta que o Derrida escreve, depois é publicada, chamada uma carta a um amigo japonês, e esse amigo japonês é o Izutsu, né? E ela fala exatamente sobre tradução. Eu não vou ler toda essa citação, como vocês podem ver aí, mas seria uma carta que o Derrida envia ao Izutsu depois que o Izutsu pede a ele algumas orientações para uma possível tradução da palavra desconstrução para o japonês. E o interessante dessa citação que eu gostaria de destacar aqui é exatamente essa parte que está em parênteses. Os parênteses para o Derrida são importantes, que é essa aqui, que ele fala: e a questão da desconstrução é também, do começo ao fim, a questão da tradução e da língua dos conceitos, do corpus conceitual da metafísica dita ocidental, né? Logo, a proximidade que o Izutsu tem com a desconstrução, a possível proximidade, ela não pode ser descartada quando nós pensamos em traduzi-lo, né? E uma segunda citação, porque é sempre difícil de lidar com Derrida, a gente nunca sabe o que ele está falando ao certo, é essa citação, aqui em que ele diz o que ele acha, segundo os termos dele, da filosofia dele, o que seria uma tradução. O Derrida escreveu bastante sobre tradução, e esse é só uma das citações em que a gente pode ver qual que é a ideia filosoficamente mediada daquilo que ele pensa ser o efeito ou o movimento da tradução, e é essa parte dessa citação que eu gostaria de destacar, na qual ele fala em outro texto, não nessa carta ao Izutsu, e aqui eu cito Derrida novamente, nessa parte que eu destaquei, mas se essa diferença não é nunca pura, ele está falando da diferença entre o significante e o significado. Tampouco é a tradução. Seria necessário substituir a noção de tradução pela de transformação. Uma transformação regulada de uma língua por outra, de um texto por outro. Aqui ele Derrida está contrapondo a ideia de que a tradução seria um transporte de um significado imutável entre dois sistemas de significantes, duas línguas que seriam exatamente diferentes, né? Então, o significado não seria tocado, né, pela tradução. E ele fala que essa concepção de tradução não seria mais adequada, seria mais uma ideia em que o que ocorreria durante a tradução seria uma língua transformando a outra, né? O que eu gosto de falar que seria uma coisa quando a gente traduz o japonês, ou um texto filosófico do japonês para o português, é tentar fazer o português falar japonês em português. É uma transformação que essa tradução faria na língua, no caso, portuguesa, né? E seguindo essas dicas do Derrida, é como eu penso proceder nessa tradução do Izutsu, né, do livro Ishikito Honshitsu, ou Consciência e Essência, né? E o termo que eu decidi discutir hoje é um pequeno termo, na verdade, é só um termo, é um parágrafo do Izutsu, que eu acho essencial, porque ele trabalharia esses conceitos importantes no livro, que seria a passagem da consciência para a essência e como a língua, ou melhor, a palavra, teria um papel fundamental. E o termo que eu vou discutir com vocês, a tradução, é não é essa citação, é esse termo aqui, essa palavra, que é bunsetsu, em japonês. Antes de ir para a leitura dessa citação, queria só destacar quais são os significados dicionarizados desse bunsetsu japonês. Ele tem basicamente 3. Um é dividir em diversos segmentos, em diversos pontos, um todo. O 2, que é um sentido usado na linguística, que pode ser tanto articulação quanto silabação. E o terceiro, que é usado mais na psicologia, que determina partes individuais e indivisíveis de um todo, né? Um outro aspecto que é importante destacar sobre esse termo bunsetsu em japonês, e que eu acho que não passou desapercebido ao Izutsu com certeza, é que ele tem uma homofonia com uma outra palavra japonesa, que obviamente também se diz bunsetsu, escrito com ideogramas kanji diferentes, mas que dessa vez significa uma cláusula da frase, ou uma unidade sintática, né? E bem, destacado esses significados dicionarizados do bunsetsu, essa citação que eu coloquei aqui, ela vem depois de uma citação que o professor Hans Peter colocou, que é do Náusea, do Sartre. E eu coloquei aqui a tradução da Rita Braga, em que o Sartre diz, né, e essa é a citação que o Izutsu faz no livro dele, e eu cito o Sartre. Estava então, ainda agora no jardim público. A raiz do castanheiro se enfiava na terra bem por baixo do meu banco. Já não me lembrava de que era uma raiz. As palavras se haviam dissipado, e com elas o significado das coisas, seus modos de emprego, os frágeis pontos de referência que os homens traçaram em sua superfície. Estava sentado, um pouco curvado, a cabeça baixa, sozinho diante dessa massa negra e nodosa, inteiramente bruta e assustadora. Embaixo, aqui em japonês, tem essa citação em japonês tal qual ocorre no livro, que eu não estou certo se foi uma tradução que o próprio Izutsu fez do francês, ou se ele pegou, mas ela será importante daqui a pouco para a gente. Por enquanto, então, agora que a gente está preparado, vamos ir para a citação que eu proponho que nós analisemos juntos. E aqui está a citação original em japonês e a tradução que eu proponho em português. E seria assim. Desconheço outro texto, ele está falando do texto do Sartre que a gente acabou de ver. Desconheço outro texto que tenha dado forma tão esplendidamente à relação entre o ser absolutamente sem divisões e o trabalho da consciência humana que vai produzindo as coisas. Em outras palavras, os entes, ao traçar finas linhas divisórias verticalmente na superfície do ser, valendo-se do significado das palavras. Para tanto, entendo que aqui palavras fazem a função originária do significado, isto é, a função de divisão que evoca a essência. A função significativa das palavras seria produzir as coisas pregando diversas etiquetas no ser, que, a princípio, não era nada mais do que o negro bloco desagradável, completamente sem divisões, que identificassem as coisas como individuais e singulares. Nessa citação, as aspas e o itálico são do original, os negritos são meus, né? A gente já consegue perceber, quem conhece um pouco o texto do Derrida, as aspas que o Derrida sempre gosta de colocar, e é também, eu imagino, uma influência estilística que o Derrida tem sobre o Izutsu. E, pois bem, como eu proponho a tradução desse bunsetsu? Como vocês veem aí, divisões. E eu acredito que no plural, né? O que se contrapõe à tradução do professor Hans Peter, que traduziu o bunsetsu para o alemão como articulação, ou e suas derivações, né, que obviamente corresponde ao português articulação. O professor Rossa também, na tradução em inglês que ele propõe, ele traduz como articulation. Eu proponho como divisões. Né? Mas, contudo, essa contraposição de traduções não é completa, né? Porque a articulação que o professor Hans Peter propõe traz aspectos que a minha tradução, que eu proponho por divisões, não consegue vencer. Por exemplo, uma de partida, um bom ponto da tradução por articulações é que deixa clara que deixa claro um aspecto que aparece na citação do Sartre, que e que felizmente o professor Jung também falou sobre a verbalização, né, que é a ideia de que essas linhas divisórias, como eu coloquei, ou essa função originária da palavra que evoca a essência principalmente ou primariamente vocal. E como ela aparece, por exemplo, na citação a citação que o Izutsu faz do Sartre, deixa eu só voltar aqui, esse pequeno detalhe aqui, em japonês, né? Quando na citação o Sartre fala que as palavras se haviam dissipado, as palavras são rendidas em japonês, de novo, eu não sei se a tradução é do Izutsu, deixa eu dar um zoom para ficar mais claro. Essa palavra, esse ideograma, que em cima dele vocês podem ver também hiragana, que são okurigana, que indicam a leitura. E a leitura que aqui é colocada é kotoba, que pode ser tanto palavra quanto idioma. Só que, contudo, esse ideograma nunca é lido como kotoba, ele é lido como normalmente katari, o que quer dizer o ato de narrar, de contar, né? Ou também como go, que quer dizer um idioma, por exemplo, Portugal go quer dizer idioma português ou português, né? Sendo que, se a gente segue essa citação do Sartre que o Izutsu traz, quando ele fala que a função originária da língua de dividir o ser é relacionada com esse contar, com esse ato de narrar, a linguagem aqui é principalmente pensada na sua forma vocal. Logo, a tradução por articulação seria, cobriria esse fato, né? Cobriria essa nuance, né, de que a linguagem aqui é pensada primeiramente como articulação vocal, né? Uma outra coisa também que a tradução do professor Hans Peter como articulação cobre e a minha não, é que no segundo capítulo, eu estou falando, essa citação do primeiro capítulo, eu esqueci de dizer isso. No segundo capítulo, o Izutsu fala longamente sobre a poesia japonesa clássica, o waka, né, que originalmente é chamada de uta em japonês. E uta não é nada mais, nada menos do que canto, né? Se ele está dando uma certa primazia o uta, a poesia, enquanto canto, novamente, a tradução de bunsetsu por articulação privilegia esse aspecto oral, vocal da função significativa da linguagem, que, por sua vez, leva à essência, né? Deixa eu voltar para a minha tradução. Contudo, o argumento que eu trago para traduzir bunsetsu por divisões e não por articulações é que o tema central que o Izutsu parece trazer aqui é que o foco é que essas divisões particularizam os entes, né? Que, por sua vez, encobrem a totalidade do ser. Se você foca a sua consciência nos entes particulares, divididos, nubla-se a totalidade do ser que ele estaria por trás, que foi também um tema que o professor Rosa trouxe, né, muito oportunamente para mim, né. Por isso, eu acho que a tradução de bunsetsu como divisões deixa mais claro que os entes só podem ser pensados, ou melhor, só podem ser fenômenos de consciência para a intencionalidade caso eles sejam entes particulares, né? E essa referência à intencionalidade, que é como ele começa a argumentação para definir a essência nos termos da filosofia ocidental, não por acaso utiliza fortemente, obviamente, a terminologia fenomenológica, tanto através da citação do Sartre, tanto quanto vamos lá, o uso desses conceitos como ser ou ente, lembra Heidegger, né? Porque eu acho que nessa primeira parte do livro, o Izutsu, ele deixa claro que é a fenomenologia, que é na fenomenologia onde a filosofia ocidental encontra a forma mais desenvolvida, através da qual ela tematiza a essência como a verdade dos entes particulares, né? Ou seja, em outra palavra, né, a essência, como o professor Rodrigo disse, né, a essência seria exatamente aquilo que difere e singulariza um dado ente em oposição a um outro dado ente singular, né? A fenomenologia para o Izutsu seria o ponto máximo onde essa, digamos, intuição da filosofia ocidental como todo chega, né? E bem, E é interessante que o Izutsu, ele, apesar de reconhecer que essa incompreensão de essência, de certa forma, define o caminho da filosofia ocidental, ele não deixa a essência fora das aspas, né? Porque nessa mesma argumentação, ele faz questão de mostrar que a essência, como aquilo que simplesmente difere um ente particular de outro, ele é só o ponto de partida para o que o professor Hans Peter, mas também o Lucas falaram, dessa consciência rasa, ou essa consciência cotidiana, e não, como muitas vezes a filosofia ocidental pareceu apontar, o ponto de chegada em que nós descobriríamos a verdade dos entes particulares, né? Então, a essência não é a verdade, a revelação da verdade dos entes, mas tão somente o ponto inicial através do qual a nossa consciência cotidiana ou a nossa consciência rasa tem para fazer as coisas que nós fazemos todos os dias, como beber água ou diferenciar um gato de um cachorro, por exemplo, né? Por isso que eu defendo a tradução de Bunsetsu como divisões do ser, e essas divisões do ser como efetuadas pela função significativa das palavras, que dividem os seres, né? Exatamente, dividir um ser de um outro, um ente de um outro, na verdade, né? Para a gente poder direcionar nossa consciência para aquele ser, e não como articulação, porque articulação em português remete a uma organização ou reunião das partes para formar um todo. Nesse caso, eu imagino que já seria um passo adiante nas classificações de consciência que o próprio Izutsu daria. Se a gente pensasse que esse primeiro passo o passo mais fundamental para a consciência rasa se desenvolver, que seria a divisão do ser, se a gente pensa ele como articulação, já seria uma outra visão na qual os entes particulares começam a mostrar que, no fundo, eles pertencem a uma mesma totalidade indivisível, ou individida, para ser mais claro, né? E, para finalizar, e também nesse sentido em que os entes, que o Bunsetsu, a divisão, os entes divididos, ou a divisão ou segmentação também, como o ponto de inflexão da filosofia ocidental, não é à toa que o Sartre, como bom fenomenólogo, sente náuseas quando ele perde a divisão desses entes, né? Quando ele não consegue direcionar a sua intencionalidade para um ente determinado, né? E nesse sentido, a gente pode incluir também aquela pergunta que o Heidegger uma vez fez, em que ele pergunta, se não me engano, eu não vou lembrar em qual texto específico, mas talvez vocês me lembrem, é que ele lança a questão que seria a mais importante para a filosofia, que seria perguntar por que há coisas em vez de nada, né? Então, não é à toa que fenomenólogos como Sartre, ou fenomenólogos que negam ser como Heidegger, se encontram espantados ou até nauseados diante do ser sem divisões, né? Mas que, por um outro lado, os pensadores orientais, né, é sempre bom deixar as aspas, procuram de uma forma de aproximação desse ser sem divisões, que não os deixe nauseados, né? E nesse sentido, e trazendo um pouco de Derrida de novo, só para finalizar, eu sei que eu estourei meu tempo já, para finalizar, e trazendo Derrida, é sempre bom lembrar a différence, com A, né, a diferença do Derrida, que é sempre um adiamento, né, um retardamento. E esse retardar ou esse adiar que o Derrida propõe através da diferença, eu imagino que nós podemos entender, de certa forma, como um sincronismo que o próprio Isustos traz, não somente da filosofia ou do pensamento oriental, mas um sincronismo entre o próprio pensamento ocidental e o pensamento oriental, pois ambos fazem ou performam, melhor dizendo, essa diferença, né? No sentido ocidental, é sempre esse atrasar, esse retardar para que o ser sem divisões não se apareça. É sempre um adiamento dessa náusea. Enquanto pelo lado oriental, é sempre um retardar ou sempre um atrasar o momento da iluminação em que o ser sem divisões pudesse ser suportado, né? Então, é na diferença, ou nessa diferença entre Ocidente e Oriente, em que eles são, ao mesmo tempo, sincrônicos, né? E eu acho que, através dessa pequena contribuição, essa que eu proponho, que é a tradução de Bunsetsu como divisões, que nós talvez possamos transformar um pouco o texto do Isutsu e fazer o Isutsu falar português, que é uma das línguas que eu acho que ele não falava, entre as dezenas. E bem, eu acho que é isso. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, Diogo, pela excelente aí apresentação da sua proposta de tradução, que acho que fecha aqui com chave de ouro as nossas apresentações, né?
Switch to English. I think it's time
Yeah,
to switch.
of course. I was just replying to Diogo. So thank you very much, Diogo. I think this was a great presentation to conclude with our session. We can open now for questions and comments from the viewers. If someone here in Zoom wants to make a comment, a question, please feel free to speak or to write in the chat, whatever you think is best. Okay, we have a question from Jorge. He wrote in Portuguese, but I'll translate so you know what the question is. Diego, muito interessante essa questão do retardar, tendo em vista que algumas religiões ocidentais parecem haver algo nesse sentido, de progresso, se assim posso dizer. Mas tem uma questão quanto à escolha de divisão. Não seria a divisão uma forma de articulação do ser? So, Jorge is asking, basically, if the division, the term that Diogo chose to translate this Japanese term, if it's not a way of articulating being, so it would also connect with the translation that Hans-Peter and Holzer did from the term to articulation. So Diogo, please.
Eu diria que não. Depende de como você está entendendo a articulação. O ser, nessa divisão, nessa diferença, usando Heidegger, na diferença ontológica entre ser e ente, pensando pelo Isutsu, o ser mesmo, o ser que seria aquele da consciência profunda, ele é inarticulável. De qualquer medida, ele é inarticulável. Ele é impossível de ser colocado em palavras, ele é impossível de ser um fenômeno de consciência, então ele é inarticulado. A divisão que o ser sofre, ou que a linguagem faz, é simplesmente uma forma de... Aí depende da tradição em que você toma, né, principalmente das tradições orientais, é só uma forma de ilusão. É como se aqueles entes particulares, o professor Junti, ele foi preciso nisso, né? Simplesmente uma forma que você encontra, que a consciência cotidiana encontra para lidar com essa extrema e radical inarticulabilidade do ser sem divisões. Seria isso.
Okay. Do you want me to translate your answer, Diogo, or do you want?
Well, I can do it.
Okay. Yeah.
Very briefly, I was saying that being, following a ontological difference in Heidegger, I would say that being is inarticulable or something like that. It's impossible to be articulated. That's why before being, if you are a phenomenologist like Sartre, you'll be have nausea, or if we are a Oriental or Western thinker, you'll be waiting for illumination, because we cannot articulate the being in words. And division, it's only the way we found to try to cope with it in an illusionary way, if you're following Zen Buddhism, for instance. Yes, that's it.
Great, thank you, Diogo. George also made a further comment here that you can also check. So, does anyone else from the audience has a question, a comment, or from our table, from our session ourselves? If anyone wants to pose a question to someone else, please feel free to do it right now.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It has to do with my paper, because it's a question about Hans-Peter translation. Could you try to help me, Hans-Peter? The page 42 of your translation. I think we need to check the Japanese. I don't know. Well, anyway, in the middle of the page, you have this Latin expression, equitas est tanto equitas, and you translate this, I'm fed, is I'm fed. A horse is simply a horse. My question, is there anybody with the Japanese original? Because I think, because the traditional dictum is not equitas, it's equinitas. And it's not so fed, it's fed height. It's the horse, I don't know how. And I just want to know.
The hoarseness.
The hoarseness, yes, that's. I just want to know if Izuto has it wrong or not, if he has equitas, which is, equitas doesn't mean anything.
I must look it up in the original.
In the original, okay. Is there anyone who can take
do you
a look?
need it right now? Or?
No.
It might take some time.
No.
So either Izuzu or myself got it wrong.
Okay.
Somebody of us got it wrong.
Okay, it was just
yeah. I will look it up.
I didn't use I wanted
write
to
you
use
an email.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to use this part of the text, but I wasn't unsure about it, and I didn't use, but I would like to be able to use it because it's really important as an expression of this Abyssinian
Yes,
comprehension.
I just found it quotation, sorry, here in Japanese. I'll just
Very good.
paste it on chat. Just
I don't think it's. Oh yeah, right now.
so.
Yep, it's a mistake from
I don't see anything.
Izutsu. Oh, he just sent you just sent it to me
To
accidentally.
Lucas only. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'll send it
I'll
to
send to
everyone. Yeah,
everybody.
there it is.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Equitas es tanto equitas. It's
We
a
have-
mistake from Izutsu apparently.
Okay, and he translates it as a horse, not is a concrete
Not
name,
hoarseness.
not hoarseness.
He says here,
The
that's a
sentence
horse, is a
above.
horse, simple as that.
What
That's
is
all.
that?
That's all.
A horse is a horse.
A horse is a horse.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
So then it was his mistake. Then it's mistake. No, I'll notice it in the text. That will be very nice to notice it. Thank you so much, Diego, and thank you, Hans Peter.
He
Thank
thought
you
it
very
was
much,
one of
Diego.
those. A rose is
So-
a rose.
So I can sleep well tonight.
Yeah.
That's good to know. I have, if I may, one remark to
Of course.
Diogo's presentation. I didn't understand very much, but my name was frequently mentioned, so I feel the need. I have to say something. Your translation is really intriguing. It reminds me of a remark by Heidegger, who once, I don't know, I think it's the later Heidegger, or maybe it's the earlier, I forgot. But he refers to the function of Logos as auseinanderlegen, to lay, how do you say that in English? I don't know, but yeah,
That's complicated, but yeah, like this movement, like just to
to
separate, really, to put
Separate.
apart,
separate,
to put apart.
Put apart is good.
yeah,
Put
to
apart.
put
yeah.
apart, and this is really close to what you want to say, maybe, Diogo. And yeah, I found it very interesting. Period.
Yes, yes, I have to find this that text by Heidegger, this quotation. But well, I probably yes. I was more thinking about. I think that I was closer to Gadama. I think so, or something like that. That well, the being that exists is the being in language. So if I make, I don't know, one example. In Portuguese, we have a specific word to do this on someone's head. It's a specific word. We have cafuné, we say in Portuguese. I don't know if there is any word in any other language, but when we have a word to this, it's not a carelessness, it's a specific one. So if we have a word for this, we have an individual being, which is different from doing this. So if you have a word for this being and we individualize it, so it can be a phenomenon of consciousness. So we create, like Izutsu say, we draw a very delicate line that individualize and separate that being from the other, so we can talk about it and put our consciousness directly to it. So yeah, I was thinking more in those terms.
Yeah, again, I don't understand Portuguese, but I was surprised by how much I did understand because of the Latin heritage English and Portuguese have. But maybe you mentioned me and the fact that I used articulation. Okay, did you? The reason I used articulation was I'm trapped. I would not have. I hate the word articulation. I think it's ugly, and I would use division as well if I was free. It's just because Izutsu unfortunately wrote in English, and he used the word articulation. And when his book was translated back into Japanese, not by him, by some guy, what's that? No Ira. It was translated back as Bunsetsu. So it's only because he did it that way. Otherwise, I wouldn't. I think it's ugly, and I don't think we should be trapped by etymology. You know, say what you want to say. Say how you understand it. Okay. You know, actually, I should listen to myself and go against what he's saying. Okay. But anyway, just to explain why I did it. Okay. Okay. The translator is the artist. Okay. Okay. So don't be afraid to express yourself.
So I actually also wanted to make a comment on Diogo's translation, but I really want to see first if anyone from the audience has a comment, the people watching, if anyone wants to make another question. Let me see if there's something on YouTube, because we're also transmitting on YouTube. Okay, nothing so far. Okay, so my question is, Diogo, I was wondering, when you talked about your translation, and you also talked a lot about Derrida, it occurred to me that maybe another possible translation to this word here right now, in terms of the sense you are trying to convey, is differentiation. Yes, diferenciação, because this seems to articulate, sorry for the pun, but really to articulate both the meanings of articulation and division, because it's this idea that you are differentiating, and by doing that, isolating something, putting it apart. And it's also interesting that it really brings to mind the Derrida, right, with the difference and so on. So just an idea that could be an interesting alternative as well.
Yes, I think also it's a very good idea. Yes, I had other ideas to differentiation would be a very good one. Division and also section.
Determination. Section.
Yes.
Yeah.
In Portuguese would be not section, would be segmento.
Segment.
It's very
yeah.
ugly. Yes, it's very ugly.
Yeah.
And I forgot to say that I've mentioned Hans Peter many times in my presentation, because I was saying very good things about your translation and was trying to say, look, my translation could be also good. Has a little bit good. Has Hans Peter's translation. Yes. I was saying, yes, that's it. I was just.
I can vouch for that.
Yes.
No. You don't need to vouch for that, because I believe implicitly what Diogo is saying. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Well, maybe I would also like to make some questions to. Well, first also to make a comment about Rodrigo's presentation. I think it was very interesting how you laid out very clearly what this problem of essence is in Avicenna. And I think, funnily enough, I think this has very interesting contemporary applications, this distinction between the universal, the particular, and the common, which is not exactly neither one nor the other. I think this is very interesting from the perspective of intercultural philosophy and dialoguing, because you don't have to choose if something is universal or particular. You can think about in terms of the common that manifests itself differently. in different contexts. So I think that's very, very interesting point to explore. Then I have a question for Rosa and for Hans-Peter. For Rosa, first of all, I don't think you really have to be okay with this fiction. It bothers me as well. I would not take seriously this East-West fiction from Izutsu. But on the other hand, I'm not entirely sure that what he's trying to say is that language is simply false. I think his take on Zen Buddhism would suggest something different, in the sense like there is a way in which we can use articulate being to point out to this deeper dimension of experience, and that which doesn't mean denying the particularities of the phenomenal world. So it would be something of the in the idea of suchness, I guess, like a horse is a horse, precisely. So do you think maybe in his reading of Zen Buddhism, would you agree that you could find something that somehow redeems language, so to speak? And to Hans, I wanted to ask, I think it's very interesting, and I really liked how you brought together Nishida and Hegel and Izutsu. I would just like to ask you, because in the end of your presentation, you said, look, maybe this modern frame of providing reasons cannot really be extended to all cultures, to non-Western cultures. But do you think there could maybe be here a deeper point here about Western cultures itself, in the sense that it would be an illusion for those cultures to imagine that they live in this space of fully well-given reasons? I mean, isn't this rather showing an internal problem that is present within those cultures itself, and only manifests itself more clearly through those Eastern philosophies that we are discussing, such as Nishida and Izutsu? Because this reminds me of Schelling. Schelling is sort of the Nishida in this point of the discussion, but he's within this culture, this Western culture, pointing out to this unjustifiable dimension of experience of being. And so to what extent we could also take this perspective on this issue. But I really enjoyed both presentations very much. Yeah.
If I may,
yeah,
that's a very deep. This is a very deep question, actually, and I'm not sure how to respond. First, I have one problem with the notion of fully justified or fully explained or something. I think this is a postmodern caricature of what the modern project was supposed to be about. And that's why I think we should leave this episode behind us. That's why I made the suggestion to take into account the more recent achievements of Kant and Hegel's scholarship, which I think with clear textual evidence, they really show that these are caricatures or, well, one-sided readings. So my point is not that these are wrong. My point is that there are other possibilities of reading Hegel and Kant, and
of course,
once we have them acknowledged, we would be ill-advised to ignore them.
Of course.
Yes, and this is my my starting point, so to speak. So I'm a radical hermeneutic in this regard. So I don't think that there is the Izutsu as there is the Nishida or the Hegel. I don't think that there is such an essence of objectifiable knowledge we can put into a box and shelf it, and from time to time we can put it out and affirm or reject the Hegelian position on whatsoever, on being or on, you name it. And under this premise, I think this endeavor of cross-cultural philosophy takes on a different image than it has been promoted that far, so far. At least what I have read in this regard, mainly by proponents of Kyoto school philosophy in the West. This is unhealthy in my regard. And so I wish to be a kind of counterbalance or something, a counterweight or something like that. And therefore, to your question, this is something that troubles me. Is this dimension of absolute nothingness relevant for us in the West, I mean, right? So you can say the same with regard to Heidegger's criticism of Hegel. No? In his lecture, Identity and Difference, he gives a beautiful summary of the Hegelian enterprise of logic, and then he shows that Hegel is thinking, so to speak, but he does not explain how thinking comes about in the first place. It just begins, right? And you can say that. And you can say, okay, there is this dimension of unarticulated, sorry, Diogo, being. And okay, but then if you ask, how do you get from this unarticulated being to the articulations in the logic? Then Heidegger has no answer. So you can say, you are begging the question in this regard. And Heidegger would revert to Hegel, you are begging the question because you do not answer why there is thinking in the first place. So here's a kind of standoff here. And I think this kind of standoff is mirrored in a way in your question. So I'm not sure how to answer, and because I'm not, it's the Schelling-Hegel divide, actually, And well, Schelling was, of course, pissed off by Hegel because the cow is in the dark and so on. Well, that's another story, and I have no answer to this problem, but I find it fruitful to implement this formally sociological concept of multiple modernities to the field of cross-cultural philosophy. So this would be very fruitful in my regard.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure whether I answered your question, maybe not.
No, definitely. It's very interesting. And this idea of multiple modernities also reminds me of Dussel in Latin America, the idea of transmodernity in that sense. So it's also connected. But I'll leave it to Rosa now to comment too.
Right. Okay, so you're asking me about is he completely rejecting language, or am I kind of stereotyping him? No, I think Izutsu is, you know, what he has to say about language in a less dramatic form is probably something we kind of all know, that words don't completely fit reality, okay? But he's using that point to say we have to go to pre-language. That's really where the full truth is. You know, Hans Peter had an interesting quote by Nishida about the eye of the philosopher is calm when it sees the nothingness. But
Which
I don't
was
know.
Izutsu, actually, not Nishida.
Oh, was it? Okay, okay. But you know, there's something that's very nice. But how does that translate into our how to run the world? Okay, there's something that nicely apolitical about it, you know. And see, Junshi recognizes that words, we do have, he talks about Junshi, the Confucius philosopher, how, you know, he puzzles about how to make words fit different categories and to find a word that can, you know, can account for differentiation. He also, at one point in a later quote I didn't read out, talks about there has to be some kind of social negotiation agreement, okay, about the usage of words. So Junshi has also recognized the words a problem, but he's not running away from that problem. He's saying we have to face it, you know, that to have a just society where we all have access to language and the laws that are expressed in language and the rights that are expressed in language and the justice that is done through language. And also the other point is, if you reject language, are you kind of this, you don't see it as the full, as a path towards truth. You are going back to a meaninglessness. Nishida, in his definition of Junsui Keiken, of pure experience, in almost the first page of his book, does say there's no meaning in pure experience, okay? Fine, but then if there's no meaning, there's no history, there's no narration, there's no, you know, we live our life by through the meanings we get, you know, they're partial, they're common, but they're kind of all we have and what we have to work with, you know. That's the problem I would raise, you know. As Ogius Sarai says, it's invention. What was the word he used? Sorry, I can't. It slipped me. It's very late at night. You know, you know, at the end there we you know. Okay, I'm sorry. I think I've made my point. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, considering that it's also late at night, maybe we should be moving. I just wanted to make a very short comment on Junichi. I believe I speak for all of us in the group when I say that this graphic was great. It was very enlightening. It was very interesting how you made those distinctions. This is definitely something we should discuss more in depth in our own group later on. But I believe then that we can conclude the session. I would just end with a final provocation, Has. On a softer level, I don't consider myself to be in the West, okay? I don't think Brazil is the West at all. But on a deeper level, not on the surface level, on a deeper level, I don't even believe in the West to begin with. So, and with this remark, I would like, first of all, to thank you all again, all the members of the session, Hans, Rodrigo, Diogo, Rosa, June, for the excellent presentations you gave. It was great to have this opportunity to be with you guys, even if only remotely. Let's hope next time you can all be in Brazil with us. We can show you around in Rio with Rodrigo and everyone, so you can have the typical touristic experience in Brazil. Thanks again for everyone.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
That's the idea. Great. Thanks again for everyone who was watching. and I'll see you guys. We have our next session at 4 p.m. right now, okay? So I will
Okay.
see you guys there.
Bye bye.